More than 24 hours after his ousting by the military, Niger's President Mohamed Bazoum remains in captivity at the presidential palace. It is unclear who is in charge of the fragile state. Earlier, violence erupted in the capital, Niamey, with hundreds of coup supporters looting and setting fire to the ruling party building. Security forces fired tear gas to disperse the crowds, while the coup leaders have called for calm. The Interior Ministry has announced a ban on armed demonstrations. Niger's army chief declared his support for the takeover in order to avoid anarchy. But President Bazoum has since issued a defiant message on Twitter. Key Western allies, including the US, Germany, and France, are condemning the coup in Niger. The United Nations Security Council is set to meet today to discuss the situation in the country. Meanwhile, the US has expressed support for the Council's intervention to de-escalate the situation in Niger. The UN Secretary General is once again calling for the release of the Nigerian president. Joining us now is Professor Efem Ubi, Acting Director of Research at Nigeria Institute of International Affairs, NIA. Professor Ubi, it's good to see you again.
Thank you, Dr.
Very
Bati.
quickly, the spate of coups in West Africa in particular. Mali, Guinea, Burkina Faso, Chad, and now Niger. Is democracy failing in West Africa? Is the democratic consolidation project failing? And is Ecowas and the AU, if I may add AU, helpless?
Thank you, Dr. Bati. It's a very sad situation we find ourselves in Africa. And much more importantly, I think we should begin to ask ourselves why these uncanny situations, why incessant coups and military purges, within a very short time frame. If you look at since the turn of the millennium, we thought things have changed because a lot of countries in the developing world, Africa, actually embrace the third wave of democracy. But right now, what I see is an African shame of progress. Now, what is happening, it is taking us back to the period, of early independence. Exactly the situation today, I think that's where we find ourselves, going back, retrogressing backward. And this whole resurgence of military coups is a big problem, not only for West Africa, but across Africa as a whole. So I think we need to do something urgently.
All right, let's talk about the Niger coup and the fact that, the updates from the president is still in captivity, the agitations, because if we're going to study the spate of coups in West Africa in particular, we must look at what some of the reasoning or the rationale behind these coup plots are. One is bad government, the fact that there's a feeling that the president isn't, isn't serving the people adequately, isn't meeting the needs, especially of the most vulnerable in the country, and so they feel a need to change the regime. In fact, in their address post the coup, they said that they wanted to move away from this particular regime and bring some sanity to government. With regards to that, what would you say about these agitations? That is it the coup plotters to blame, or the countries whose presidents, leaders are not treating the people right? Is there any justification at all for this?
Well, I wouldn't say there's any justification for coup plotting. It's an aberration, as far as we all know. But much more importantly, the question is, why are the military coming back into politics? Now, the next question is, why are the civilians themselves even jubilating when these things happen? Now, that brings me to your answer. I once did an article, is liberal democracy failing in Africa, which Dr. Bati asked me, or the article was titled, is liberal democracy failing in Africa, or Africa failing under liberal democracy? As a matter of fact, I look at it from both ways. Liberal democracy is actually failing because of a cocktail of reasons, which are very complex. You've listed some of them: weak economy, and which is what in that article I say, weak economy and the imminent revolt from the bottom. I also talked about ethnicity, problems of ethnicity, problems of sit-tight presidency and permanent presidencies. you know, and a host of other factors. Now, if you listen to coup speeches right from the 60s, you know, up to today, you know, a lot of factors come into play. Mismanagement,
yes.
you know, maladministration, leadership ineptitude, corruption, economic reasons. But one thing that was not there, you know, in the 50s or 60s that has been added is insecurity. Now, if you listen to the coup that has taken place recently across West Africa, they all raise one issue, aside the other maladies that we've talked about, insecurity. The government is incapable of managing insecurity, you know, and all that. I think if you look at the Mali situation, that was what happened, you know, prior, you know, and because the Tuaregs were actually gaining, you know, advantage over the military, and they had to strike, you know. But that is not enough evidence. I think the government in these countries, they have to sit up, they have to look at the reasons for this. Now, I think government in the 21st century should be people-oriented, development-focused. You know, we should be preemptive in terms of peace and security. We shouldn't be looking at preventive early warning system. You see, if you put in place things that could safeguard the people, you know, that, I mean, and living the people, eradicate poverty if you can, you put infrastructures to enable business, proper business and investments to come in and all that. Employment, you know, I think this could stem coups in Africa and in West Africa. Right now, as far as the globe is concerned, West Africa is a hotspot, and much more importantly, the Sahel is the hottest amongst the regions.
Okay, so let's also cascade this into a lot of foreign phenomenon happening. We've seen a couple of these countries that have planned coups. The Russians have been a good ally. From the Assimi Goïtas of this world, the Tombabayas of this world. Most of these countries are former French colonialist countries. And part of the things they say is, oh, they're against the French colonialists. And now they're tilting towards the Russians. Should we be scared? Because even yesterday in Niger, in Niamey, in the Nigerian capital, there were Russian flags being flown. This was also the case in CAR. This was also the case in Mali. This was also the case in Guinea. What's your take on that?
Well, my take is that, you know, no doubt we have a lot of foreign influence in Africa. And, you know, if you look at Africa history, 150 history with regards to the West, we know that they have been here. And so sometimes you can't divulge, you know, what's happening in Africa from Western influence, you know, from the superpowers too. And in any case, for me, I think, you know, that governments in Africa or nations in Africa will have to relate with who they will benefit more from. I'm not actually saying that they're actually part of the, actually give credence to the coup, you know. I'm not saying the Russians did, I'm not saying the Americans or any of the European countries did. But you see, if you look at the trend in the last few months, there has been this talk about African renaissance, economic renaissance. We have to move away from that embryonic attachment to the West and to our former, it's not a very good language, former colonial masters, you know, but, you know, this attachment, if you listen to Mali's broadcast a few days ago, Mali is saying they are now moving away from the French language, trying to adopt their own language. And now this is what we should be thinking. I'm not supporting what the junta is doing, but this is what we should be thinking. I think we should now create an identity for ourselves. It's a part of the problem in Africa and part of the reasons these things are happening. We really do not have an identity. We have borrowed identity. For instance, we should have a history. Our history should actually create that identity, our culture, our language and everything. And so I think once we begin to do that, we'll begin to move away from most of this uncanny, unconstitutional change of government. Now, the legal frameworks are there. you know, the AU, the Economic Committee of West African States. But this framework too is actually not really working out. And why is the problem that? Why is it like that? First, you are talking about the problems of semantics. You know, sometimes it is not very easy to define, you know, most of the concepts and the issues there. Then we also talk about the problem of acceptability by these nations across Africa. Now, you see, our leaders within the multilateral institutions, African Union, Economic Community of West African States, and other regional communities should look for, you know, a better way to ameliorate the problems of military purchase or unconstitutional change of government in Africa. And so I think what is happening now is something that we need to sit up and begin to look for answers. Now, that brings us to the fact that we have to start looking for solutions from within. The solutions doesn't have to come from the outside. You see, we know our problems. We must sort the solutions from the inside. You know, if we begin to look for solutions from the inside, you see, we should stop adopting hook, line, and sinker. We should adopt and adapt and look at the social structural dynamics of the system and look at the political, economic system that we are operating, and now adapt some of the things. Not everything you can bring in. You know, there are a lot of case study. Why we should begin to look for alternatives. There are alternatives and alternatives. That is the modern scenario now. That's what we should be looking for.
Okay, that's a question of sovereignty. Yeah. The latest development in Niger. The coup plotters are saying nobody should interfere. The military is backing the coup plotters, coup makers, as they now are. But President Tinubu, as the chair of the Authority of Heads of States and Governments, had said Ecowas will not tolerate a coup. Niger is probably the Western world's only hope in the Sahel region. So you have Blinken, you have UN Secretary General, you know, saying, no, this is unacceptable. But the coup makers are saying, well, this is a matter of sovereignty, and we have taken a decision here. Can sovereignty be a defense in this kind of situation?
Well, you know, it's a very important question you've asked, you know, looking at the issues of non-interference and non-intervention in the internal affairs of other countries. And many countries adopt this as their foreign policy options and objective. And so, but even with that non-intervention or interference clause, you know, we also have the international system, the R2P, you know, responsibility to protect. Which revolves around human security. And so it depends, you know, when you can intervene, you know, when the situation has become a pogrom or is degenerating into genocide. But in this situation, you're not intervening and neither are you interfering. You're only mediating. What the president has, the high delegates that he has sent is just to mediate, is just to arbitrate, you know, and see where, you know, what can be done to bring back democracy in Niger. And so I think it is not wrong for me that countries are actually intervening, that the Economic Committee of West African States, headed by our president, is doing he's doing the right thing, and that's what he should do, you know, irrespective of the closure of borders and all that. I think there should be communication, you know, because you see, whether we like it or not, democracy remains a better form of government. We can't degenerate into autocratic regimes and dictatorship, you know, in this 21st century. I think we should look at what's going on across the globe. But much more importantly, whatever democracy we are adopting, whether it's liberal democracy or whatever form, you know, we should make sure it aligns with our social structural dynamics. You know, I think that's the important thing we have to do.
In line with that, let me just ask, do you have any proposals, having studied democracies in Africa in particular? But beyond that, I wanted to ask, you talked about the Ecowas.
Yes.
Unions like Ecowas, what role? They play a significant role here because Niger Republic is a member of Ecowas. Now, Ecowas has said that they should release the president, President Bazoum, immediately. They've called for his release. They've called for restoration to the status quo, but The question is, how powerful and influential is Ecowas, particularly when it comes to matters like this? What are the options available? There have been suggestions around, should there be sanctions? Should there be closing of borders? Should there be negotiations with the coup plotters? What options are available, especially for Ecowas and Nigeria as a giant, particularly in Africa and West Africa?
The options are always there. I told you there are legal frameworks. We have to act and work within the ambit of the legal frameworks. But aside the legal frameworks, individual nations, could actually send or, arbitrate in this kind of situations. And like I said, these legal frameworks are there, the conventions are there, but, it is a matter of accepting it. You see, if these nations actually accepted the conventions and live by it and try to adopt it as as a legal framework within, these coups wouldn't occur in the first place. And so it's because we don't have respect for these legal frameworks, and this is where we need to work on trying to make nations accept these legal frameworks as a document that could help build an Africa of our dream. So my advice would be generally that nations that are close to Niger, that have better friendly relations with them, I think they should intervene. In terms of arbitration, mediation, talk to is it Abdurrahman or so, the Colonel Major, and talk to him and see how they could come to a proper settlement, where they have to release the president that is in captivity right now, or that is in detention, and see, they give them, I think they should give them a leeway to move out, slowly. It happened in Satuma and Principe under Chief Olusegun Obasanjo when he went there and told the coup plotters, please come out. They negotiated and they gave them
great Malabite. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
One other Malabite is on the ministerial list.
Yes.
As I keep saying, you guys are everywhere.
we have to give Mr. Rufai honorary Malabite.
Are you really? Well, thank you very much, Professor Efem Ubi,
Thank you.
Acting Director of Research at the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs.